In the end, there would be no answers, only questions. Questions that stretched across the sea and the centuries. Questions that whispered from the grave, questions that still linger in the empty spaces between us and the dead. This is the first episode of a series about a vanished colony, about the people who came before us and the secrets they left behind. It's a story that begins with silence, a silence too deep, too clean, too final. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like absence, but erasure. The fort is gone, the tools are gone, the houses are gone. All that remains is a single word scratched into a post, a single clue in a forgotten tongue. But maybe clues are just stories waiting to be discovered. Maybe every whisper from the past is trying to tell us something. If we listen, if we're brave enough to hear it, this is the first episode of a series. Each week we will uncover new pieces of the Roanoke mystery, new stories from the past that shed light on our present and remind us that history is more than just dates and names. History is a conversation, across the sea and the centuries. It's a conversation that we are a part of whether we remember or not, and some conversations, once begun, refuse to end. The English came to this land with dreams of empire, with maps and plows and pigs. They built a fort and carved their initials into trees as if to claim the very bark of the wilderness itself. They named things after English towns and kings, and everywhere they went, they brought their language, their culture, their god, and yet something unexpected happened. Somewhere between the planters in London and the palisades of Roanoke, something shifted. For here, on this wild new shore, the English encountered something they could not possess, a wilderness that would not be tamed, a continent untouched by English rule, and somewhere in the struggle to subdue it, to understand it, to survive it, something essential was lost. The English left behind their tools, their homes, their very identities, and in the end, all that remained was a single word, a single clue. Who were the people who carved that word? Who were the people who walked away from everything? And perhaps the most important question of all, why? Join me now as we follow the clues. As we seek the answers, we uncover the stories that connect us to the vanished colony of Roanoke. We are their descendants, the inheritors of their questions and their dreams, and together, we will find them, not in the places they left behind, but in the stories they began. Long before the English arrived with their plows and their prayers, Roanoke was known by others. The Algonquian-speaking peoples who inhabited the Outer Banks in coastal Carolina did not see the island as empty wilderness, but as a place of balance and warning. Its forests were dense and strangely quiet. Its waters teemed with fish, but the tides could shift in an instant. To them, Roanoke was a place to tread carefully, to approach with reverence. But the English, in their ambition, mistook caution for invitation. When the first expeditions arrived, they found the region beautiful, wild, yes, but promising, fertile, warm, rich in timber and wildlife. But they also found a delicate web of native alliances and hostilities that they neither understood nor respected. In their arrogance, they believed they could control the land. Instead, they fractured the balance that had held for generations. John White, the leader of the 1587 colony, was not a soldier, but a mapmaker, an artist. He painted the peoples he encountered with care faces etched in detail, garments meticulously rendered. In his journals, he recorded the land not as a battlefield, but as a place of possibility. Yet even he knew that the colony's survival was precarious. Supplies were limited, relations with local tribes were tense, crops failed in the salt-heavy soil, and the colonists, many of them families rather than soldiers, were unprepared for what lay ahead. When White left for England, it was with the promise of haste, but the return would take longer than anyone imagined, and during those years, the records go dark. What happened between 1587 and 1590 has never been known. No letters, no survivors, no oral testimonies from native groups, nothing that survives in documented form, and it is in that void that the darkness grows. There are stories, of course. One tale, passed down among the Lumbee people of North Carolina, speaks of ancestors with gray eyes and strange speech. Another legend tells of a village inland where fair-skinned children were raised among native families. These whispers have fueled the theory that the Roanoke colonists, facing starvation or danger, sought refuge with indigenous groups and were absorbed into their communities. But if that were so, why the silence? Why no further contact? No return? No message sent in all the decades that followed? There is another theory, darker, quieter, that something happened on that island, not from without, but from within. That fear took root, that paranoia bloomed, that the settlers, cut off from the world, under constant threat of death, began to turn inward. Perhaps the word CROATOAN was not a destination, but a name, a person, a warning, or even a spell. The name has power, after all. Even in modern times, CROATOAN recurs in strange places. It was found scrawled in the journal of Edgar Allan Poe, shortly before his mysterious death. It appears in stories told by Lovecraft, in disappearances, in nightmares. To some, it is just a word. To others, it is a symbol, a door. Back in 1590, John White was desperate to interpret it. He had arranged with the colonists that if they were forced to move, they would leave signs of Maltese cross carved into a tree to indicate distress. There was no such symbol. The carving was clean, deliberate, purposeful. White believed they had moved to CROATOAN Island, now known as Hat, but he would never reach it. Weather turned, supplies dwindled, his ship was damaged, and so the last chance to solve the mystery was lost, and with it, the colony vanished into legend. Some say the colonists became ghosts, literally or metaphorically bound to the land by whatever fate claimed them, that they were neither fully dead nor fully living, that the island swallowed them, and that even now, under the soil, their footsteps echo. Others believe that Roanoke was a wound in the timeline, an early trauma in the colonial project, one that infected everything that followed. Jamestown, Plymouth, the Trail of Tears, the land remembered the violence, the fear, the hunger, and it never forgave. Whatever the truth, it remains hidden, just beneath the surface, waiting like a breath held too long, like a name carved in wood, like silence wrapped around a scream. When we think of lost civilizations, we think of lost cities, of crumbling walls and silent squares. History does not always lose things. Sometimes it hides them, and in the case of Roanoke, what's missing is not just evidence, but closure. What endures is not simply mystery, but unease. For more than 400 years, the story of Roanoke has drawn scholars, writers, mystics, and seekers. Each arrives with their questions, each leaves with more. The trail leads nowhere, just fragments scattered across time. And yet in those fragments, there are shapes, patterns, a suggestion of something larger, something older than the colony itself. Roanoke is not just a mystery of disappearance. It is a story of resonance. In 1607, 17 years after Roanoke vanished, the Jamestown colony was founded just a few hundred miles north. It, too, struggled. Hunger, violence, disease, but unlike Roanoke, Jamestown endured, and in its endurance, it buried Roanoke deeper. Official records stopped asking. The mystery faded into the margins. But in folklore, it thrived. There were stories told by sailors of phantom lights dancing along the outer banks, of voices that rose from the fog, speaking in tongues not heard in centuries. There were whispers from the local Algonquian tribes that spoke of pale ghosts wandering the woods at night, searching for something: food, family, the way home. Even within English circles, the tale took root. Some believed Roanoke had been cursed, that the land itself rejected their presence, that something ancient, buried deep beneath the soil, had awakened when the settlers arrived, something that demanded silence in return. Others believed it was justice, that the colonists, in their arrogance, brought with them not only disease and weapons, but imbalance, that the land responded not with rage, but with erasure, There is a strange calmness to Roanoke's vanishing. No battle, no ruin. To disappear. To die is different. To run away is different. To be removed so completely that only questions remain in your shape. That is what happened at Roanoke. Roanoke was not the first time people vanished in history, but rarely had it happened so cleanly, so fully, so elegantly silent. It is this silence that continues to echo. In the years after the disappearance, a strange transformation occurred, not just in folklore, but in the language surrounding Roanoke. The colony was no longer discussed as a failed settlement. It became something else entirely, a mythic event, a puzzle offered by history with no intention of being solved. People stopped asking what had happened and began wondering why. Why here? Why this group? Why so completely? As the colonies along the Atlantic coast multiplied, Roanoke remained a warning, not spoken loudly, but passed in glances and uneasy conversations. Settlers avoided the island. Ships passed by without stopping. It became a place marked, not by graves or ruins, but by uncertainty. And uncertainty, for those who sought control over the New World, was intolerable. But the land never forgot. Centuries later, during excavations in nearby areas, Hatteras Island, the mainland, even distant inlets, artifacts began to emerge. A signet ring here, a fragment of armor there. Tools, beads, and pottery, some clearly English, others hybrid, altered in ways suggesting adoption or adaptation by local tribes. These findings fed the theory that some colonists survived, living out their days in hidden villages, blending slowly into native cultures. But survival is not the same as presence. There is a difference between living on and being remembered, and Roanoke, as a place, resisted remembrance. Even modern archaeological projects speak of the land itself being uncooperative. Soil erodes faster there, structures collapse without reason, equipment fails, and always, the forest grows faster than expected, covering tracks, swallowing trails, muffling footsteps. Historians often speak of lost colonies as though they simply missed their mark. But Roanoke feels less like something lost and more like something taken, and not just taken from the maps, taken from time, like a page torn from a book, not left behind, but removed so the story cannot be read properly, so the next chapters feel unsteady, so the questions accumulate, and every time we turn to history to look for clarity, Roanoke sits in the corner, staring silently back. What if we are not meant to solve it? What if the point of Roanoke is not truth, but discomfort? What if some things are meant to remain unclear, to remind us that empire is not destiny, and that the land does not always welcome those who walk upon it? There is a theory, rarely spoken aloud, that Roanoke was never meant to be permanent, that it was a test, a ritual, a story planted not to succeed, but to echo. Some point to the symbolism. 117 people, a number divisible only by itself and an island, isolated and ringed with tides. A name CROATOAN carved, not burned, not written in blood or ink, but etched patiently into wood, like a signature. Theories, yes, speculation. But in the absence of fact, meaning fills the gaps. And the more you listen, the more you hear the rhythm beneath the history, a beat not unlike the pulse of the forest, a breath held too long, a pause between footsteps. Roanoke was not just a place, it became a pattern. And like all patterns, it repeats quietly in the places we forget to look. In the year 1587, on an island off the coast of North Carolina, a group of English colonists settled. They built homes, planted crops, and lived more or less as they would in England, except for one crucial difference. They were alone. No one knew where they were. No one knew they were there. They were the first modern humans to make this place their home. Or perhaps they were not the first. There's something unsettling about a mystery that refuses to decay. Most vanish with time. Names fade, places erode, interest withers, but Roanoke remains. Not loudly, not urgently. It lingers like fog that never burns away, like a presence in the room that doesn't speak. And perhaps the reason it stays with us is not because we don't know what happened, but because a part of us fears we do. Fear is a curious emotion. It thrives not on violence, but on uncertainty, and Roanoke is pure uncertainty. The colonists vanished. Yes, but what if they were never meant to survive? What if their purpose was not settlement, but sacrifice? There are accounts rare, fragmented, that suggest strange beliefs may have taken hold among the settlers in those final months. A fragment of a journal, attributed to an unnamed member of the colony, surfaced in the 1800s. Its authenticity remains disputed, but the handwriting is consistent with the period. Its ink faded, words stained by moisture and time. Among scattered entries on food shortages and conflicts with local tribes, one passage stands out. The forest watches. It does not speak, but it listens. At night, the trees shift. They do not move, and yet they are not where they were. Some hear it low, like drums, far off, under the ground. We keep fires lit, but even fire feels hollow now. Most historians dismiss the journal as fiction, but the language rings familiar, too precise, too real. The fear is not theatrical, it's intimate. It reads like someone slowly unraveling. Some theories draw from this idea not that the colonists were killed, but that they surrendered. To the elements, to the forest, to something they could not understand. That they walked willingly into the trees, not as an act of desperation, but of devotion. Devotion to what? Here the lines blur between history and mythology. Indigenous tribes of the region had stories of spirits in the woods, beings that protected the balance between worlds. Not gods, but watchers, guardians, punishers, if disrespected. If the colonists unknowingly violated such spaces, the retribution might not have been physical, but spiritual. Some speak of the hollowing, a concept found in multiple traditions where a person becomes so overwhelmed by an environment, by fear, or awe, or guilt, that they begin to lose identity. Not quickly, but gradually. They forget words, faces, purpose, until they vanish, still breathing, still moving, but no longer themselves. Could Roanoke have become a vessel for such a transformation? Imagine 100 souls, isolated, forgotten, slowly shedding names and memories, until all that remained was the whisper of a word. CROATOAN. There is evidence, subtle, buried. An archaeological site on Hatteras Island revealed a peculiar totem, a carved figure, half English, half native in style. It bore the marks of both cultures, beard and tunic, feathers and clay. It faced inland toward Roanoke, as if watching, as if waiting. These objects do not prove anything, but they suggest a hint, and sometimes, in the absence of certainty, suggestion becomes truth. Because the silence of Roanoke was never just emptiness, it was a presence. And presence, when it refuses to be named, becomes legend. This is the space where I share stories that are either terrifying, mysterious, or both. And today I have a special treat for you. I'm going to tell you about Roanoke. Generations passed. Children were born who had never heard the name Roanoke. Maps were redrawn, cities rose, empires fell. But in the quiet places and forgotten coastlines, in aging libraries, deep within family stories, the name persisted. Not loudly, not constantly, but just enough to keep the question alive. Roanoke did not die with its people. It metastasized into memory. By the 19th century, the mystery had begun to transform again, not into fact, but into obsession. Writers and folklorists started to see the story not as tragedy, but as metaphor. A warning about colonial pride, about arrogance, about the hubris of assuming a land would bend to will, simply because a flag had been planted. In dusty university basements, amateur historians passed letters back and forth, searching for overlooked footnotes, misfiled journals, untranslated maps. Some believed a breakthrough was close. Others began to believe in patterns, that disappearances like Roanoke had happened elsewhere. Small villages in the Old World, monasteries in the mountains, crews aboard ships. One researcher, Elisa Hall, a professor of early colonial history in the 1890s, wrote extensively on Roanoke. She believed the answer lay not in what happened to the colonists, but in what they became. In a private letter to a colleague, she wrote, "What if Roanoke did not vanish, but shifted? Not geographically, but spiritually, a community that reached a threshold, a breaking point between worlds, and stepped through. What we see as absence may simply be transition." She died under unusual circumstances. Her notes were found scorched, partially soaked, and unreadable. The official cause of death was an electrical fire, but the file mentioned no damage to her home, just her desk, just her work. Of course, it could be coincidence. And yet Roanoke is built of coincidences, too many, too precise. In the 1930s, a series of stones were discovered in Georgia and North Carolina, claiming to be written by Eleanor Dare, daughter of John White and mother of Virginia. These Dare stones, as they became known, chronicled a long and tragic journey through the wilderness. Death, desperation, a plea for remembrance. Some believed them to be forgeries. Others defended their authenticity. The controversy was loud, then faded, like most things tied to Roanoke. But in 2019, one of the stones previously dismissed was re-examined using modern techniques. The results were inconclusive. The stone was old, the carving, possibly authentic. And just like that, the silence shifted again. This is what Roanoke does. It speaks, just enough to keep you listening. Then it falls silent again, just long enough for you to forget. Then it returns, altered, familiar, but not quite the same. Like a voice in the fog, like footsteps behind you that stop when you turn. Like a story half remembered in a dream you didn't know you had. Roanoke is not history. It is recurrence. Not a moment, but a loop. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this piece, please consider supporting me. Until next time, keep an eye on the fog. There is something about the word itself, CROATOAN, that lingers. People speak of it with hesitation, as if the syllables carry weight, not just sound, but substance. Like the toll of a bell in an empty room. It does not scream, it resonates. Historians have long debated its intent. Was it a destination, a message, a name? But outside academia, others began to ask stranger questions. What if it was not carved for the rescuers? What if it was not a clue at all, but a seal? Across cultures, names hold power. In many traditions, to name something is to bind it. To carve a name into wood is not merely to communicate, it is to consecrate, protect, or trap. Some modern occult scholars, those who live on the fringes of history, argue that CROATOAN was not just a place, but a ritual, a final act by those who remained. An offering to whatever claimed them, not surrender, but closure. And that's not the only place the word has appeared. It is documented, though rarely discussed, that in 1849, during the final, fevered days before his mysterious death, Edgar Allan Poe allegedly muttered the word CROATOAN before collapsing on the streets of Baltimore. He died shortly after, his final days undocumented, incoherent. A coincidence, perhaps, but in 1888, when the famed stage actor Edwin Booth lost his brother John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln, the word CROATOAN was allegedly found carved into Booth's prison cell wall in Old Capitol Prison. No official record confirms it, but the rumor endures. The steamship Carolina Deering, which wrecked off the coast of North Carolina in 1921, was found completely abandoned, no crew, no signs of distress. On the mainmast, a single word scratched faintly into the wood, CROATOAN. Again and again, the word surfaces, in disappearances, in death, and isolation. Is it superstition, or signal? Some believe Roanoke was not unique, that it was the first in a chain of events and ancient rhythm that repeats across centuries. A calling, drawing people toward disappearance. Not violence, not destruction, but dissolution. The edges of history are frayed with similar stories. A lighthouse keeper who vanished, leaving only a flickering lamp. A family farm left with dinner still warm on the table, yet no soul inside. A town abandoned overnight with no sign of struggle, and each, a whisper of the same echo, gone. But deliberately so. This is what unnerves us most. We are used to death. We understand tragedy. But Roanoke is not about what happened. It's about what wasn't left behind. It's about how the colonists were resonant messily, but methodically, as if they were never meant to stay. Some modern psychological theories have explored the possibility of mass dissociation. Trauma so profound that a group loses its collective grip on reality. It's rare. It's usually temporary. But what if, in complete isolation, under intense psychological and environmental pressure, the settlers slipped into myth, slipped into something beyond our reach, slipped into the silence between history and silence, and that silence is still alive. People who visit Roanoke today describe a sense of displacement. GPS malfunctions. Time feels stretched. Sound travels strangely. There's no wildlife. Even the ocean seems quieter along that stretch of coast. Locals tell stories quietly, cautiously, of dreams that repeat themselves, of faces glimpsed in the trees, of voices calling at night in an old lost dialect. No one lives there now, not truly, and maybe that's wise. Because Roanoke doesn't belong to the present, it belongs to the threshold, to the moment just before something disappears. I'm from the channel. Time moves forward, but Roanoke never does. In the 21st century, surrounded by satellites and screens, the idea of an entire community vanishing without explanation feels more foreign than ever. We are trained to believe that every event leaves a trace. Every story has an archive. Every mystery, eventually, a resolution. But Roanoke remains an exception. And exceptions, they leave marks of their own. Modern archaeologists continue to probe the islands and coastlines of North Carolina, searching for evidence, bones, tools, settlement remains. The work is meticulous, careful, scientific, and yet, It often feels like archaeology conducted in a dream. Each dig uncovers pieces, but no whole clues, but no key. In 2015, a team using advanced ground-penetrating radar detected unusual soil patterns on Roanoke Island itself. Rectangular impressions, consistent with buried structures, long since rotted, but once organized. Near the site, fragments of English pottery were discovered. This seemed promising, but days later, those fragments were missing, misplaced, catalogued under the wrong number. A clerical error, they said, but one that prevented further testing. A year later, a researcher from that same team published a paper suggesting that a deliberate pattern of dispersal had taken place at the site, meaning, someone had not only dismantled the colony, but hidden its parts, planted objects, removed others, as if the colonists had attempted to erase themselves. Not disappear, not flee, erase. If true, this raises a more profound question. Why would they want to be forgotten? Some psychologists propose that in extreme crisis, people do strange things to assert control, that perhaps in the face of starvation, isolation, and fear, the colonists found meaning not in survival, but in vanishing on their own terms. Others believe it wasn't choice at all, that the environment itself, the land, the air, the island, worked on their minds in slow, insidious ways, that something about Roanoke disassembled identity, not violently, but gently, like sand slipping through fingers. And yet, across the world, the idea of Roanoke persists. Artists return to it, writers cannot leave it alone, musicians use the name in lyrics. Filmmakers attempt to capture its atmosphere, but always fall short. Something about it resists fiction, because fiction requires resolution and Roanoke refuses to resolve. In 2021, a documentary crew spent 3 weeks filming on the island, hoping to capture new drone footage and gather local oral history. What they reported, off-camera, was more unsettling than anything they released. The lead cinematographer spoke of footage that wouldn't render properly, of drones losing control mid-air, of audio recordings that picked up voices when no one was speaking, of a shared dream, experienced by 3 members of the crew, involving an old woman speaking a language none of them knew, but all remembered upon waking. When they left the island, none of them returned to complete the project. The footage, what little remains, is fragmented, half-glitched, warped by data loss. But in the fragments, viewers have noted something strange. A figure standing in the tree line, not moving, not reacting, present in multiple shots. Same distance, same posture. The producers dismissed it as coincidence, a tree, a shadow, but some frames show the figure in places where no trees stood. Roanoke does not give up its stories easily, or at all. Perhaps that's the point. We look to the past expecting it to explain the present. We search for continuity, for roots, for meaning, but Roanoke offers only silence. And silence is uncomfortable, because it mirrors back our own questions. What would we do, cut off from the world? What would we become if the sun did not rise tomorrow? If no help came? If no one remembered our names? Would we write a letter? Carve a sign? Or would we slowly, carefully, take everything down and vanish? They say some places never forget, that the land keeps score, that it remembers every step, every word spoken, every silence held too long. And Roanoke quiet, low, wind-washed Roanoke may remember better than any place else. In the early morning mist, you can still walk its edges. The trees grow tightly now, as if reclaiming something. Moss curls down from the branches like whispers. The earth is soft beneath your feet, too soft. Birds don't sing here the way they do just a few miles away. Even the wind, when it moves, carries a different tone. This is not a place for answers. It never was, and yet people keep coming. Historians with notebooks, ghost hunters with thermal cameras, psychics with outstretched palms, everyone hoping to pull back the veil, to find the missing line in history's manuscript. But the more they search, the more the silence deepens. Roanoke, it seems, is not hiding something. Roanoke is the something. And that changes the question. What if Roanoke was not an event, but a phenomenon? What if it was not a tragedy, but a threshold? A tear in the fabric of colonization, not from resistance or violence, but from rejection, as though the very soil refused to be named, as though the land swallowed the settlers, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity, for balance, for correction. In 2023, An independent researcher using light detection and ranging scanning on nearby CROATOAN Island revealed patterns beneath the forest floor. Concentric rings of disturbed earth, unnatural in shape, too symmetrical for erosion, too old for modern human intervention. A circular formation roughly the size of a small village. It was located deep in the interior, far from any known settlement paths. At its center, stone markers, heavily weathered, shaped like teeth. No excavation was permitted. The site lies within protected land. But aerial photographs, briefly released online before being removed, showed something else. Within the formation, in stark contrast to the surrounding foliage, one patch of trees had browned prematurely, curling into shapes that some claimed resembled characters or symbols. It was dismissed as natural blight. But it appeared again the next season. The researcher left the project. The site is now inaccessible to the public. And still, Roanoke waits. Some say it's a haunting, that the souls of the vanished remain tethered by unfinished business. Others argue the opposite, that centuries have passed, the world has changed, empires have risen and collapsed, languages have died. Satellites now watch the earth from above. We build machines that see heat, that read DNA, that map the sea floor, but Roanoke remains, not as a place, as a presence. You can't point to a single grave. There are no relics in a museum, only a name, etched into time like a breath held too long. CROATOAN. It is easy to reduce the colony to just another historical mystery, something to fill a documentary or pad the end of a textbook chapter. But Roanoke is more than that. It's not just the silence, it's how the silence feels. Familiar, cold, deep, like an echo from somewhere beneath your skin. Ask yourself, why does this story stay with you? It has no ending, no heroes, no clear villain, and still it lingers. Because it touches something universal and old, ancestral fear, not of death, but of being forgotten. And not just forgotten by others, forgotten by the world, by the land, by time itself. That's the horror of Roanoke. It's not the loss, but the erasure. What if you disappeared, and the earth made no sound? There's a theory, a final one, not published, not peer-reviewed, but passed quietly between thinkers and folklorists, whispered over late-night coffee or between dusty archive shelves. It says that Roanoke was not the first, nor the last. That across time, in every era, certain places call to the edge. Not loudly, not with screams, but softly, repetitively, like a lullaby sung backward. They don't destroy, they invite, offer peace, perhaps escape, release a place to unwrite yourself. Roanoke, in this version, is a kind of mythic gravity, a concept more than a location, a metaphor that became real. Or maybe something real that became metaphor. And when John White arrived, 3 years too late, he wasn't looking at ruins. He was looking at absence given shape, at 117 lives folded into silence. What did they find? In the trees. What did they become? Did they kneel in ritual? Did they hold hands and vanish with breath unbroken? Did they hear a voice? Or was it simply quiet? The truth, if it exists, lives only in the space between what we know and what we fear. And Roanoke sits there still, waiting, listening, carved into the wood of time. The land remembers, the wind remembers, and maybe, so do we. So the next time you walk through the woods and feel watched, the next time you dream of names you've never heard, the next time you find a word etched into stone, a door left open, a fire still warm, whisper at CROATOAN, and listen not for answers, but for silence.